everyone.
Hello, I am Garrett Labonte, chairperson of LFC Boston, and would like to welcome you to our LFC Boston Speaker Series. Today, Patrick Delaney, our secretary, will be hosting Neil Atkinson, the Anfield Raps content creator. As part of this series, we've been making charitable donations, and by request of Neil, today we will benefit Michael Liverpool. We will also be sharing a link in chat if you'd like to make a donation. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Patrick Delaney, who will introduce Neil Atkinson.
All right. Thanks, Garrett. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of the LFC Boston Speaker Series. I'm Patrick Delaney. I'm secretary here, joined by our producer, Alice Finizzi, our treasurer as well. So just thanks to the rest of the committee for helping us do this. And a special welcome to anyone that's joining us that isn't quite a member of LFC Boston yet. You know, we're still open, or if not, you can join us next season and hopefully join us when in the bar when it's safe to do so. So get right into the introductions. Neil, welcome. How you doing? How's it been? You know, we're kind of getting towards the end, maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, of quarantine. But how you been? How's life?
Life's all right. I mean, it is, we all, I think, want it to be the end. And I think that's the thing to point out. I think everyone's got their own sort of timelines on when they'd want this situation that we find ourselves in to stop by. I think from a sort of uniquely footballing perspective, I think it's dead interesting there. You said about, joining us for next season. I think we've all got our eyes on basically second week of August. First league match, that it'd be great if we could have some normality in terms of your bar being full, the stadium being full. I think that's what everyone wants. And I think that, for people who do love football, no matter who they support, I think the idea of it going back to what we used to at the start of next season is the thing that everybody is very committed to.
Yeah, no, I think everyone's kind of like looking to the future, especially with maybe some of the results. Everyone's kind of like, this is our wash. But yeah, we're gonna talk kind of about Neil, not just as a Liverpool fan. He's got some just like film producing stuff like that, the content at the Anfield Wrap, and then we'll feature some questions from committee members, from Q&A, from Facebook Live. So if you have any questions, be sure to get them in there. And we'll spend around 45 minutes talking, and then we'll kind of transition more into the listener questions. So we kind of like to start off with kind of like our guest footballing background. So like, when you first got into football, what are your earliest memories? Were you immediately a supporter, or is it something that you kind of had to get forced on you?
No, I think from about the age of about 5, to be honest with you, I was, my dad and my uncle and my godfather both grew up in Anfield. So it was always sort of present and there and around when I was growing up, and I went to my first match when I was 5 years old in the running of the 1985-86 season. So I can still, I think, remember it. I think you've always got to be careful with false memories or with the way in which things get spread around. But it's a game I don't think I've ever seen any footage of, and I can remember things from the match. And one of the big things that happened in the game was that Gary Gillespie, who was Liverpool's central defender, scored a hat-trick. And he got his 5th goal in front of our end. It was a penalty. So we got a penalty. We were 4-0 up, and the crowd sang for Gary to take it. And I can sort of remember Kenny waving to get Gary to come from the defensive line to take the penalty, and he scores it. And then everyone sort of cheers and all of that sort of stuff. And it was the run into that double winning season. And I can remember in our old house watching the final wearing full kit. My uncle Wenz, he brought me back a programme. It's one of my favourites. I've now got another copy of the programme. It's not the same copy, but it's one of my favourite pieces of memorabilia. And to sort of spool forward, when I was about, I'd say about 34, I did some work as a stringer I think it was for 8x8, I'm not quite sure, but for a magazine. And they needed me to go to Gary Gillespie's house in Southport and ask him questions. So I went and I knocked on the door, and he let me in. And the first thing that you see in his hall to the right is the signed match ball of the day he scored the hat trick. So literally, as I walked in, there's the ball from my first game of football that I ever attended at Anfield. And I must have, I had like a Don Draper, Mad Men-esque existential moment staring at this football. And Gary probably wonders, why is this fella who's just come in to ask him a couple of questions for 8x8 frozen in his tracks, staring at this ball, looking like he's about to cry. So I had to explain all of that, and Gary couldn't have been nicer about it. And I'm hoping, like, long term, he remembers me in any will.
No, I think that's incredible. I think a lot of people, especially like on this side of the Atlantic, wish we could have had those memories at 5, like in Anfield. You mentioned that you had family direct ties in Anfield. So what was it like growing up, knowing that like in the city there is this like Everton versus Liverpool rivalry? Because growing up in Boston, you hear about the Yankees, but there aren't really Yankee like supporters like around, but it's that unique dynamic. So what was that like growing up?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that sort of does get missed from people who are overseas. And by overseas, it doesn't need to be that far overseas. I think, for instance, for the Irish supporter base, they very much have a strong rivalry with Manchester United because, and to an extent Arsenal, because that was the way the support split there. But in Liverpool, Everton are a constant presence. To be quite honest with you, still are now, and it is something that is a little bit different. And back then in '86, we beat them to the league title that year at last game, and then we beat them in the FA Cup final. So I think thinking of Everton not just as a local rival, but also as a trophy rival, as a force, is something that I don't think a lot of Liverpool supporters have sort of had to do for a while. And I think it's something that, again, gives it another edge and gives it another feeling when you're in the city with the Blues. I think on the whole, a lot of it sort of gets overplayed in terms of the idea that there's tons of animosity. I don't think it is as unpleasant as it could be. I think there are times when it flares up, but it can be very unpleasant. But I think it's mostly just a good thing, to be quite honest with you. It's good that there's that sort of energy. I like that. I like the proximity between Goodison Park and Anfield. I like that it is just there. It will be a shame if they do move not to have Goodison and not to have it just there. It's great to go to Goodison. I know that's something which, again, people sort of forget. I think a lot of overseas supporters come and really enjoy Anfield, but it's hard for me to get tickets for away games, let alone anybody else. So a lot of people never really get that experience. And then you can times that by 1 million with the idea of getting a ticket for the Goodison Derby. So, I think it's remarkably difficult for people to sort of muck in with all of that. But I mean, I love the Goodison Derby. It's absolutely terrific when you get to go to that. And as I say, it doesn't happen to me every year, but when it does, you enjoy every minute of it. And it's because of that intercity rivalry that's really, really special.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that even though they haven't been, I mean, we always love to say like 25 years since you won a trophy, but I still feel like it's never something that you can just kind of brush aside. I mean, if we think about even the matches this season, I mean, they've been much more competitive, and there's nothing you can take for granted. As you push more
I'd
towards,
quite like 40 years. That's the one I'd like. I'd like to be 54. And Everton still haven't won a trophy. I think it's in sight. I think it's achievable. I think, unless things really turn around for them quickly in the League Cup, I feel as though we could get 40 years, and what a 40 years it'd be.
what would you think you would celebrate, or what would mean more to you? Going 40, actually not mean more to you. What would disappoint you more, as maybe United kind of coming back and becoming a force again, or Everton becoming a force again?
You're never going to get rid of United. So United currently sit second in the league. You've got to be honest about it. Like, the budgets that are at play and all of that sort of stuff, the way in which football is now, you're never going to get rid of United. United could win 2 trophies still this season, or they could win 1 trophy still this season. Even not dissimilar to us. I hated it when we won the league, and some journalists referred to it as having been 30 years of hurt. I mean, I've had a great time. To be quite honest with you, and we'd won everything else in the game at least once in that period, and we'd won the European Cup twice during that 30 years of hurt. It was a nonsensical thing, and we're like United in that regard. United will have I think a lean period. They're not going to win the league this year. I don't think they win the league next year. I'd be surprised if they won the league the year after. They're going to easily go, I think, 10 years without having won the top title in the country. The thing that they've won more than anybody else. They're going to go 10 years, I think. But in that 10 years, they'll have won a Europa League. They'll have won, I think, 2 FA Cups. They'll have won a League Cup, I think, in that period as well. So you're never going to get rid of United. And also, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for English football either. And I don't think it's a bad thing for Liverpool. You want that cut and thrust with United. Whereas all of this reality, it does keep Everton at bay. It's very, very difficult, as they found out this season. It's very difficult for Everton to win a trophy because they might be able to beat one of the top sides, but to win the FA Cup, you've got to be able to beat 2 of them or 3 of them, for instance. I think that they would struggle if they got back into Europe in the first season they were back in there, because they just don't have any sort of European experience innately within that squad. So I think we can keep the Evertonian wolf from the door for longer and enjoy that. Whereas, United, we haven't got the full figures for everybody yet, but I think United have, in the 2018-19 season, had the biggest wage budget in English football. So you're never going to be able to keep them away from silverware.
Yeah, no. And when you mentioned that 30 years of hurt, it's like I'm not even 30. So like I don't remember the last league title. I wasn't around, but I can remember cheering like just the season before winning the European Cup. Like for me, like that was just like that for me, that was the big first trophy of my adulthood. And like I was like, I mean, I'm having a great time. It wasn't years of hurt. So
No.
let's transition to that Europe of like we have by the end of April. I mean, Liverpool versus Real Madrid. It's it's that rematch that we don't really like to think of. But how are you feeling leading up to the European matches, and how do you feel personally about like our vague rivalry recently with Real Madrid?
I mean, it's all based on that final, and I think that's much more about the players than it is about the 2 clubs. To be quite honest with you, the game before that when we faced them is the group stages of 14-15, and it's a bit of a non-event. They're much better than we are. I think they'd won 22 consecutive games in that period where we play them. Then there's another game in there, the 2-legged affair, 08-09, when we merged them. And I think it's all about that notion of Ramos and Salah going into that final. But in lots of ways, that final was the making of this Liverpool squad. That final, I think they learned an awful lot from what happened to them, and had a determination that they were going to be the gnarly, cynical, horrible, unpleasant bastards that win football matches. They were going to be the people who do that, who run that. And I think that's a good thing. I think if they'd have beaten Madrid, there's a chance they don't go on and win the title in the following 2 seasons. Whereas I think a lot of what they learn from that game against Madrid really sort of gives them a steeliness that they managed to push right the way through to the end of the 1920 season. So I'm not feeling as though there's some sort of grand rivalry with Real Madrid, but I would just like to beat them, and I think we can. I think looking at that draw, how it could have gone, I think City, Munich, Paris Saint-Germain, I think 3 sides that would be capable of taking the tie away from anyone, not just Liverpool, but anyone in half an hour. I think they're 3 sides that are more than good enough to have half an hour across 180 minutes of football where they can score 3 or 4 goals and just take it away from you. And I think that we've managed to avoid all of those teams is major. But I actually also think we could do that to Real Madrid. I'm not saying we will, but I think we could do that to Real Madrid. Real Madrid are probably the only side in there, because of the issues around the age of them. That a really weird age profile of a squad. Not many players in peak years. A lot of young players who are really exciting actually, but who are having to develop in a bit of an eye of a storm, and a lot of older players coming to the end of their career. But I think we could actually do that if we can hit our straps at some point. I could see there being a scenario where we could score 2, 3, or even 4 goals in a 20 to 30 minute spell and put the tie away from them. I think that is possible, and it's what Real Madrid will have to guard against. Whereas I don't think they can do that to us. I think they can beat us, and I think they can knock us out. But I don't think they can just swat us aside. I don't think they can just make it all really, really difficult. So I think we've got a really good chance there. And I feel the same about Chelsea or Porto as well. I don't think either of those sides could do that to us either. I think, again, Chelsea especially, we know they're capable of beating us because they've beaten us recently. But I feel as though for them, we could, we can have a sort of an awareness that it'll be a real cut and thrust classic European affair if we get Chelsea in the semi. But I don't feel as though they're capable of just sort of putting us to the sword. And then if we did manage to get all the way to the final, suddenly it's just 90 minutes. So this idea of this 30-minute period that Bayern, City or Paris Saint-Germain have got, well, they've got less time to do it. They've only got a 90-minute match where there's nerves in play, where injuries will have taken a toll. You're not quite sure what everyone's squad is, so on and so forth. So I think the draw couldn't have been kinder, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really, really good two-legged encounter against Real Madrid. And to be honest, I genuinely do fancy us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you brought up was like the age profile, and I feel like it's something that's kind of similar to all the teams that are on our side of the bracket are kind of in like the changing of a guard, like the changing of an era. They're like in between where there's, Sergio Ramos is a name, but he's 34, 35. They don't have like Modric won the Ballon d'Or at 33, 34. So like they have all these names that we're supposed to be afraid of, but we're not afraid of them as much. And maybe not as scary because, they're 34, 33, etc. And I think, like Simeone is trying to be more attacking, changing of the guard there. And who knows what Chelsea is at the moment. Between Lampard's Chelsea, Tuchel's Chelsea, like it's crazy. And I think, when you just said it comes down to 90 minutes, that can just be whatever. We know we can be the best team in the world at 90 minutes. We can also be the worst team in the world at 90 minutes. So I just think that it's just like if there's ever a chance for us to go on and win the European Cup in like an off year, this is probably the best possible route to do it. Yeah, so like we have a community member, Adam, our social media manager, that really, really hates Sergio Ramos. Are there any people that like you think you hate as much as maybe some people hate Sergio Ramos? And do you think Mo Salah will be gunning for revenge?
I mean, I'll never entirely forgive Steve Watson, but I think that the idea of specific footballers, I find it quite difficult when you're on top. Like I used to despise Rooney at United, whereas now with a bit of distance, I'm quite he was really good, and also the truth of the matter is you're not quite in the maelstrom of it. Manchester City as a club, I find them on the pitch and with the coaching staff. A lot of people don't like Guardiola for a variety of reasons, but I think he's incredible, and I find him really quite difficult to hate. There isn't a Manchester City player who I find particularly contemptible, and I think at the moment we're in a bit of a strange moment. I think in certainly in English football, where because of what's gone on, most of the footballers are remarkably likable. There's the obvious stuff around sort of Rashford, but I think Scott McTominay looks like a perfectly good lad, if you know what I mean. I think Maguire is what he is, but he seems all right whenever he speaks. He always seems all right to me. So the idea that there's anyone really at the moment, I think, there was a lot of, if you go to peak era Chelsea from 2005 to 2012, there was a lot of footballers you could really put your back into despising who played for them. But now, current era, Kante seems like a great fella. I like Tammy Abraham when he speaks. I feel a bit sorry for Timo Werner. Azpilicueta has been a great professional. You know what I mean? You just sort of end up going, yeah, they're all right, aren't they, the footballers? So I think it's, like Tuchel, and he will rub the right people up the wrong way, which I'm looking forward to at some point. So I think it's difficult at the moment to do a sort of a, to really put you back into it. So by all means, go after Sergio Ramos. And I think that the atmosphere would be hysterical if there were people in the ground around Ramos, and he'd love it. He'd love being the pantomime villain. That's very much what he wants to be. He would absolutely love the idea that Anfield was baying for his blood. And if anything, it might even make him play better. So yeah, I think, and I'm sure that Salah, it isn't just the injury in the final that stops him from winning European glory with Liverpool, because not least because he goes on and wins it the following year. I think from Salah's point of view, it will be the international aspect as well, that he lost the opportunity at the World Cup to really be able to lead his country, because he was clearly nowhere near fit enough for all of that. So I think that will be the thing that sort of plays on his mind about it as much as anything else. He didn't just take him out of that game, but he very much blunted him for a World Cup charge where he was going to lead that Egypt team, and we saw what that meant to him when he qualified for it.
Yeah, no, I wish I could add something to that, but I felt like you just kind of wrapped up everything really well. So like, I think we've kind of covered Europe. So let's go take a look domestically to the Premier League. How have you felt about that? Do you think that? I mean, some people say you can't blame injuries forever, but some people say, well, as long as there's injuries, you can blame injuries. How have you been kind of viewing this season compared to others?
I think in general, I think it isn't just the Van Dijk injury, it's the Gomez injury to compound it. And I think that that's the sort of what I found a little frustrating to see be overlooked. I think that if you actually look in the immediate aftermath of the Van Dijk injury, Gomez wasn't playing very well up until the point at which Van Dijk gets injured. He doesn't start the Merseyside derby. Gomez, he comes on, but I thought Gomez was really beginning to step up. He's great at Manchester City. He gets over the concession of the penalty really, really well. I think he just has a very, very good game leading that defence. So I think ultimately the injury aspect is both. I don't think it's one or the other. And then I think what Liverpool have found difficult, in a way perhaps a bit too difficult, and there's a legitimate conversation to be had there, but to really sort of go into it, I think Liverpool have found the circumstance difficult without supporters, and that isn't some sort of notion of, that they need the crowd to play well. I think what it's allowed teams to do is to be able to keep a really good tight shape and shell and frustrate this Liverpool side. The example I always use is when we go to Newcastle on the 30th of December. It was an 8 p.m. kickoff, and Newcastle defend relatively well. They stay solid, they stay compact, and it finishes 0-0. If that had been 0-0 on 70 and Newcastle had played the match exactly the same way, but there'd have been 50,000 Geordies in the ground, then there would have been a situation where the emotions would have taken hold, and I think that game would have had a winner one way or the other. Now, it might, 3 times in 4 because we've got the better players. It's Liverpool 1 time in 4, it's Newcastle. But what I think would have happened there is that Newcastle would have been obliged to have a bit of a go. There are people in their home grounds. Everyone's drunk. Everyone's had a big Wednesday between Christmas and New Year. Everyone's going berserk. You can't just sit on the edge of your own box. If they'd have gone and got a goal and then sat on the edge of their own box, they'd have cheered every clearance, every tackle. But you can't just sit on the edge of your own box. People don't want to watch that. That's not what they go to football for. And I think Liverpool have sort of struggled to deal with that. And I think City have dealt with it better, a lot better. I think a lot of cities, the game that they play recently, where they go to Goodison, and Everton try to frustrate them, and Everton play relatively well for a period. But you just always felt like Everton were never going to score, and City were had given themselves 120 minutes to score a goal. And I think a lot of our football at times, even before Christmas, would be a little bit too anxious, a little bit too urgent. We were trying to force the issue a little bit too much, and we were just not really managing moments all that well and managing games quite as well as I'd like. But the flip side of that is I do sort of feel a bit like you've got to dance with the girl that brought you on this. Klopp, very much, everyone remembers what he does after the 2-2 draw against West Bromwich Albion, when he takes the players to the Kop, and at that moment he makes that covenant of they'll give everything for you, but you've got to give everything for them. And I think that Klopp has put the supporters at the centre psychologically of the team building exercise that he's done at Liverpool. And I think that for those players to never even have had a parade, they win Liverpool's first league title for 30 years. They've never had a parade, and not once have they taken to the pitch and been acclaimed by 50,000 people chanting champions at them. That idea, it isn't the idea that they're not given 100%, but that idea that you find something extra. I was at games in 2019 at the start of the 1920 season, and we forget, and I'll probably talk about this more, but we forget what the start of the 1920 season was like. We've all become quite complacent about the league winning season, like it was inevitable because they win 26 out of 27. But the day that they beat Southampton 2-1, Southampton have a great chance towards the end. Adrian makes the error to give the goal to Ings. Southampton are the better side for most of the first half. They just don't take the chances. And every game felt like a cup final. And every game, I'd remember being in grounds and you'd sing, champions of Europe. Were the champions of Europe. You'd sing world champions after they won that in Qatar. And that idea of just being able to remind them in key moments, lads, you're champions. You're the best. This is you're going through the process of being the best. And they've never had the payoff for that. They've never had the support of that. They've never had that moment. And so I think that has fractured them a little bit. And I think within that, you can say, well, they need to be stronger and they need to be this and they need to be that. But if as a manager, as a man, if what's been at the core of what you've wanted to do with the team and what you've made its motivation is the response of the people, if you put the people at the center of what you do and then the people disappear, then I think that it is difficult just to sort of say, well, you can click your fingers, it can all be different. Now, you could possibly click your fingers and it could all be different, but you're missing your two best centre-halves and your best holding midfielders are having to play in defence. And Jordan Henderson's never been quite fit for a period of time. And Trent Alexander-Arnold had COVID for a while in there as well. And you don't really trust the young lad who's replacing him because he hasn't got two good centre-halves next to him. So you're not quite sure what you're going to do at right back. And then within that, then all the bits of this fine, well-oiled machine, all the cogs are just a little bit out of place. And so whilst occasionally you're getting certain wins and you beat Palace by 7 and you beat Tottenham, etc., etc. But even here, I think, whilst being sympathetic, what I think Liverpool have struggled with is accepting, and it's partially having the mentality of champions, but I think they've struggled to accept where they are, that it was a season that they just had to get through, and there were moments in games that they just had to get through. So for me, the classic example is the game against Leicester, where they get a really harsh VAR decision that goes against them, and it's 1-1. And they've been great. And they kick off like champions. They're trying to score. We're better than you. We're just going to go up the other end and score. That's what we do. And that's when it goes 2-1 and 3-1. A draw would have been fine. But when you've been going at the rate that they've been going against Man City, they've built themselves on this idea that draws are like defeats. But there was a period of time this season in certain games where a draw would have just been fine. And they allowed themselves to get swept up in the emotion of the moment and lose control. And I think that that's something which they are going to have a little think about, and they should have thought about earlier. Frankly, there was that run of games with Leicester, Chelsea and Everton where we lose all 3 of those matches and a draw was fine in all 3. And part of where we go badly wrong is that we grow in anxiety when we go behind. We didn't manage the moments particularly well because we felt like we had to win, and we did not have to win any of those games. A draw was absolutely fine in all 3 of them because the job is now just coming top 4. And I think if we'd have drawn against Leicester and drawn against Chelsea, give us 2 more points and take 2 points off both of them. Look at the league table right now. And with the relative quality of the run-ins that everyone's got, got a really good chance of top 4 here. And I think that it is something which, in hindsight, I don't, if you'd ask, that's the thing I will be most critical of. Not the idea that they couldn't retain the title, not even the idea that they couldn't put in an 85-point season. I think there's loads of circumstances around that. But I think when this changed around them, which I think it's probably done by the time they draw with Man United at home, they can't win the league really after they draw with Man United at home. And what they don't do is take a breath and say, right, let's shift our aim, shift our approach a little bit and begin just to stop the bleeding. And I think that's been my sort of biggest criticism. But there's obviously even around that loads of mitigating circumstances.
Yeah, no, it's trying to just pin it on one single thing. You just can't do it. Everything requires nuance and just an understanding of like they've given everything they've had for 3 seasons straight, and then this happens to come right at the kind of their peak and their climax of everything, and without the support of the people that they basically have used as a foundation to kind of launch themselves into this new era, it really just kind of has left them with just kind of like empty hands, just being like in like empty tanks and just unable to go. It's been it was 30 years, the title drought specifically. I mean, we mentioned before that it wasn't an unhappy and trophyless 30 years, but do you think there's would you go out and celebrate the title like in a way, or is it just like too far gone? Has COVID just kind of lasted like and had like it's a COVID hangover just like too much to the point where you're just like it's just, even though like they should have had a big parade throughout the city, hundreds if not thousands of Liverpool fans come, is that just kind of like gone and past?
I think it has, unless they win the Champions League, at which point they can almost wrap the 2 things into one another. I think if they win the Champions League, it's a little bit different, and they can have that. But I think it is now difficult. I think when the manager said we will have our parade when suits us, I think he was envisaging a situation where things were just a lot cleaner. I think he was envisaging the idea that it'd be in August or September. To be frank, I don't think he was thinking, it would be sort of 12 months on when quite literally somebody else is champions, which is what it will be. So I think that'll be difficult. I mean, if they wanted to have a go for it, then, I'd support it wholeheartedly, not least because it's an excuse to go out. But I think it's really, really difficult. I think that changes if they win the European Cup. If they win the European Cup, then it's mostly the same players with 1 or 2 absences and 1 or 2 additions. And I think that could almost be, a big street party to celebrate the last 2 seasons, arguably to celebrate the last 3. And by all means, if someone wants to have a word, throw Dexy Lovren and Adam Lallana on the bus as well. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Get Genie to hang on if he's going to get off. Just ask him to do a couple more days, and we can all do that and enjoy that. I think that'd be fine. But I think it is now too far gone.
Yeah, I would like to see some of those other guys come back and have a chance to have the prey that they deserved and they fought for but didn't quite get.
There's other ways to do that. I mean, we're not going to get to play Zenit St. Petersburg, but it would be nice to, for instance, for Adam Lallana to come back and start a game playing for Brighton, and hopefully we don't get beat by them this time. And there's 55,000 of us in there, and it's 3-0 to Liverpool, and Adam gets subbed off in the 75th minute, and he gets a standing ovation from the ground and gets his name sung. That's the way it's always happened historically. Let's do it that way where Lallana's concerned.
No, that's very good. So there was a lot of concern in the past window about our ownership group. How are you feeling, 10 years on about FSG?
We're going to do a show on this on Monday, so do listen. I don't know what anyone's going to say, but we're doing a conversation around Fenway Sports Group on Monday and their ownership of Liverpool. I think ultimately, you can't argue with the European Cup and the league title, and with the European Cup final. And I think it's right that people say, well, that's down to Klopp and the players, because, well, yeah, it is. That's literally how this stuff works. It's always down to the manager and the players, and you've got to pull that sort of thing together. But, I think they've been part of that and part of that process, to be honest with you. I think they've took the time in the end a little bit with Liverpool, and they've thought through what it is they're trying to achieve, and they've hit upon a structure that works for them, with reference to Gordon and Edwards in amongst Jurgen Klopp. I think they've understood where value is in the marketplace, and they've understood where you can go very, very big and get additional value. I think that the Van Dijk, Alisson and Fabinho signings, I think we forget the size of the price tag that Fabinho comes with. I think they've worked that out. I think they've also worked out cycles for players a little bit. I think that's why I sort of think that people might be surprised whether Liverpool finish in the Champions League places or not. I think we might go a little bit bigger this summer than some people think, because I think one of the things they'll look to do is to use the idea that you pay transfers off for 3 years, so you can go heavy in year one, and put a lot of money out off the basis of the fact that you're going to have to make those repayments across years 2 and 3, but you can therefore sort of bring 4 or 5 new faces in. I think the summer of 2018, when they introduce Fabinho, Keita, Van Dijk's just come in the January, and they do another couple. I think one might be Oxlade-Chamberlain. There's no Oxlade-Chamberlain's already there. They do, there's somebody else that I've not thought of. Alisson Becker is in there, and there's one other, Shaqiri. So they do those 4. And it's in parts, subsidised by the Coutinho sale. But I think that that's an example of them having in the past being able to be really, really smart in terms of outs as well as ins. I think if there's a thing they've got right in the sort of the player trading thing that they and Mike Edwards and Mike Gordon have got right, is that they've been really, really good at letting people go. And then I think a couple of things happen. I think that they wanted continuity in the summer of 2019. I had a big argument on one of our shows with Ian Ryan about this, where, he was making an argument, could there have been a couple of additions and a couple more outs in the summer of 2019? And I think that argument has some validity. But we then go and win 26 out of the first 27 games because we back continuity as an approach. And again, we forget, because it's 26 out of 27, I think in the backs of our minds somewhere, we all think, well, there was a bit more wiggle room, or we all think, well, Origi didn't really play that much, or anything like that. Whereas ultimately, I think the approach that Klopp and Edwards wanted was, these are our lads. We go with them all again. We all know them. We haven't got to get anyone settled in. Everyone knows what we're trying to achieve. Everyone has our approach. Everyone's got our mentality. Nothing's different. We just go and we keep going. And I think that you can make the argument of, well, you could have done Divock for 30 million and maybe spooled that in, and you'd have had someone else in and all of that sort of stuff. But what you don't get to do is act as though, well, we definitely would have won 26 out of the first 27 if we'd have got a better player in, or even if we just sold Origi. It's a counterfactual point, but it's one that I think you forget the precipice that so many of those early matches were on. as I mentioned before, with Southampton. There's another couple in there I cited on the show, and people were being a bit rude about it on the YouTube comments, and I'm a big boy and I can take it. But I mentioned on the show, Origi comes on at Sheffield United, and he's a nuisance, and he's part of what creates the confusion, and Wijnaldum scores the goal. Now, that's not to say, Origi wins us the league, but my point is that what we've all done now is we've just presumed that team was going to win the league anyway, no matter what. It certainly didn't feel that day when that day when they went to Bramall Lane. We didn't sing we're going to win the league until Mo Salah scored against Manchester United. We didn't sing it because nobody thought it was that certain. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, everyone's gone, well, we murdered everybody and we walked it. But then, living this thing, that was what the energy was like. I remember the first time City dropped points, and we were all, against Tottenham, and I was literally running down the street to catch injury time in a pub because I decided not to watch it, and then it's saying it's 2-2, and it was an unbelievable charge of energy. It was like winning a cup. I've won League Cups and given less fucks than City drawing 2-2 with Tottenham, and I think within all of that, everyone's been determined to sort of go, well, it could have been different and you could have done this or that. Anything could have had a knock-on effect at that stage. Anything. They do so well. And they go from there. So I think that's an important sort of point for me to take that. We asked them to win as a league, these people, whether it's FSG or Klopp or whatever, and they've won as a league. We said we just want to win as a league. We haven't had one for God knows how long. They've won as a Champions League. They've got to a Champions League final. There's been other finals under Fenway Sports Group. There was a period of time where it felt like Jordan Henderson was cursed, but it's all right. He very much isn't. So I think there's other stuff as well in there, conversations around furlough and conversations around ticket price things where they've had to reverse themselves. I think they've done well. I worry about them a little bit moving forward, but I think the Redbird partial acquisition is quite interesting, not from the point of the fact that I think it'll give Liverpool more money, but for me, it suggests everyone is very aware around sports rights. I'm very aware ultimately of the power of football, soccer within that. I'm very aware that with Liverpool, they've got an unbelievably powerful brand in every single sense that they can look to work leverage from a partnership point of view. And I think also the other thing is that in part of all of those valuation stuff, there is a part of me that feels like my interests and Fenway Sports Group's interests align, in that if Liverpool are able to consistently compete at the very top end of the Premier League, they'll be a much more valuable commodity. If they're a much more valuable commodity for FSG, then I don't care. But to do that, they need to continually be a Champions League club. But if they're continually a Champions League club and they've continually got the equal joint level highest wage bill in English football, if that remains the case, then Liverpool will be in and around winning trophies most seasons. So, that's where our interests align as far as I'm concerned, and that works for me as well. My only mild slight concern is that it may well be across the next 2 or 3 years that European football does need ownership-based cash injections to make the transfer market work, both from the point of view of sales, where Liverpool have been in the past, where they've sold ever so well, but also from the point of view of acquiring the very, very top talent. And I'm not quite sure if FSG will have a plan for that or will necessarily want to engage in that. But when I say I'm not quite sure, it sounds as though I'm saying with certainty that I'm certain that they won't. And I'm not actually certain that they won't, because as I say, they've got this asset, and if they want this asset to remain valued where it's valued and they want it to be what it offers the whole of their sports group, then they may well be prepared to bite the bullet and be a little bit more expansive. Time obviously will tell, but I think on the whole, they've done a pretty good job. The question is what happens next.
Well, I feel like the questions and the thing of sport is you don't ever really win a sport. It's always what happens next.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a thing I picked out of that was there's a theme that kind of in your last answer just kind of came a lot, was continuity of the players, continuity of management, continuity of a strategy. And it kind of reminds me oftentimes of the Real Madrid when they won back to back Champions League. If they didn't really if you looked at the squad, it was mostly the same players year after year. And when people always complain about the lack of incoming transfers, the lack of overhaul, it kind of reminds me of that. They're lucky they didn't have a Manchester City in the league that also was going to put up record, goal scoring tallies, record points tallies. But it's it's the continuity of just like getting to know each other, forming that chemistry, forming that bond that kind of allows them to push forward year after year after year.
Klopp mentioned that before we played them in the final in 2018. He said that, you know, the fact that they're able to do this in the transfer market's incredible. And he acted like, you know, like he said, that's my ideal. I'd like to be like that. And then that's what we were like in 2019. And I think even now everyone goes, well, that was ridiculous. Why did we do that for? Why is everyone stingy? It's in part what the manager wanted. You know, he wanted that continuity in there. And we can decide he's wrong by all means, but he's won a Champions League in 2019 and then won 26 out of the first 27 league games the following season. So his ability to point at a track record and a CV to say, no, actually I was right it's indisputable, I would say. And that's why this is difficult as a conversation, because as I say now in hindsight, and not the other thing that happens to them in amongst all of this, when they decide that they'll give Shaqiri another year and they'll give Divock Origi another year as an example, rather than sell them and look to recruit to replace them in the squad, is they obviously do not anticipate a global pandemic. They're not sat there in the summer of 2019, and it's not like anyone will have put their hands up in a meeting and gone, all right, lads, this plan's pretty solid, but what are we going to do if the world's economy collapses and the transfer market tanks because of COVID? No, that was not on, you know, it wasn't a conversation anywhere. So I think that they will have felt at that moment that Origi and Shaqiri, to use those two as examples, would remain assets. They would have felt that people would have discretionary money that they could throw around, that a West Ham would feel as though either Origi or Shaqiri was worth 30 million quid last summer and make a gamble accordingly, whereas that just didn't happen and is unlikely to happen this summer. And I think that that's where, for me, the FSG question comes in. Are they prepared to say, right, for a couple of years, we're going to have to accept that the sale money that we've been getting, this transfer market thing is a bit weird. And for a couple of years, we're going to have to find a way to effectively subsidise that, cover that, do that a little bit differently. Because I think that is the thing that would hurt Liverpool, and what they will have allowed for is that money would be present somewhere in the transfer market and they would be able to cash in on those assets. And I think that that's now become really tricky.
Yeah, it's, I mean, we can't fault them for not really preparing for that. We've had John Gibson on. We have you, but we brought you on not just because of you guys. You talk about Liverpool like every day, you know, but we also want to like hear about the Wrap itself. So we take like a break from what's happening right on the field, but we'll kind of bridge this into last time you were in Boston, night before the Sevilla match. What do you remember from that night, if anything?
I remember everything. We had a great time. It was the biggest live show we've ever done. And we had to, ultimately we were in House of Blues, and what you had to do was you had to remember that it's a music space. So you had to use music, use lights, use noise. I think music obviously goes down brilliantly. There's 2,000 people, 2,500 people that all stood up. So that's quite something, if you're trying to do a sort of a podcasty thing. So you've got to do it differently. And we had to commit wholeheartedly. I was backstage with Jamie Webster at one point, and I was saying to Jamie, I'm not sure about this, and Jamie said, you're going to go out there and you're going to absolutely smash it. You're going to give it everything from the first minute. You're going to be fine. He gave me this pep talk, and I was like, right, yep, channel Jamie here. Let's do it. Let's go. And that's what we did. And it was, I thought that, John was great. Josh and Craig with the business. Josh especially, absolutely delighted me. I think Craig was second on, so I was on first. I think Craig was a bit like, whoa. And then by the time Josh came on, he was all over it. And John was everything I'd expect him to be in that scenario, absolutely glorying in it. And we wanted it to be huge in that way. We wanted it to be that celebration of the European Cup winners. And so getting to do that's brilliant. And then getting to do the other bits and pieces around it was magic. And we found out just before we went on that we were interviewing Jurgen Klopp the following morning, which we then went and did. And then we went for a couple of beers, me and John, as the lads went back and did all the editing, because we get to be the stars and the divas and they have to go and do all the graft. And then we went on stage in Fenway Park in one of the stands with LFC Foundation, did a bit of work there, and did another slightly different show there with John DJing and me talking predominantly. And then we went to another bar, and then we watched the lads play in Fenway Park. And then we did an Anfield Wrap show in a bar in Boston at midnight, where the lighting was terrible, and we had Fuad with a torch, and Josh with a torch, as we did this mad show at midnight. Chris Pajak from Redmen came on, and Chris was wrecked. And we were just holding it together, and Mel Reddy did it. She was fantastic, and that was Boston. You know, we only got 2 nights. We were very much in and out, or 3 nights. I think it must have been 3 nights. We got 3 nights in Boston, and it was quite something. We had an absolute ball, and everyone who came to speak to us and everyone we spoke to was just really kind and generous. It was terrific. You know, I liked Boston an awful lot. I went there to go to a film festival, the Sci-Fi Film Festival in Boston in 2016, because my film that I'd co-written and co-produced was screening there. So went to Boston for that, and really liked the place. I mean, it was painfully in February of 2016, ridiculously cold. I came to your supporters club bar to watch the Aston Villa 6-0 when Divock got off with the lad in the stands. I was in the supporters club bar for that early kickoff on that one, but I like Boston an awful lot. I think you must all have a lot of money if you live there, but it is a really cool place, and it feels like it's a proper city. It's a city you can walk across in a day, and I love that. You know, it's not a sprawling sort of thing. Obviously, it has suburbs everywhere, it does, but the actual core of Boston, you can tramp it in a day and really enjoy it, I think. And so it's a great place to be, and hopefully we'll get back.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that night. I remember talking to Fuad. I remember talking to John. I remember throwing a can of beer up to John on stage because he ran out, and he saw me and was like, I talked to you at the open training, so go and grab me a beer." So I did that. Also, in the comments, Linda Mittman just wanted to say she had a great night. That you guys were boss. So, in the past year, it's all been difficult. How have, for the Wrap as an organization, how have you guys managed it? And are there takeaways that you have found that have worked really well for you, or are you just kind of want to go back to how you were, February of 2020?
Yeah, we'll go back to 75% of how we were. I think there's some shows that we can allow to be remote, either consistently or a bit more often. I think we can take that pressure off ourselves and our guests, but ultimately there is a certain energy of being in the same room with people that matters an awful lot. You know, from a business point of view, when the pandemic first hit, it was hard. We lost subscribers. We just about sort of clawed them back when the football resumed, just about. But the plan was always, from a business point of view, was that the league victory would be something that would spur us on to further growth. That's sort of not happened as we'd like, and also because of Liverpool's form, because the inconsistency of the game. The film's called Native, Jason, because the inconsistency of the games, because Liverpool have been poor. We've seen the subscriber number sort of diminish across the last 6 weeks. So if anyone on here doesn't subscribe, have a little think about it. If anyone on here know someone who they think would like it, who doesn't currently subscribe, then do everything you can to encourage them, because we do rely upon people to spread the word of what we do. We think what we do, both during the pandemic but also separate to it, is something that anyone who supports Liverpool would find the £10 a month or £7 a month worth of value in. You know, not every show is for everybody, and we know that. Not everyone wants to necessarily hear that much about other Premier League teams. Conversely, not everybody wants 3 or 4 different looks at one Liverpool match from different perspectives, and that's fine. People find what suits them. So I think there's everything that you need in there. And it's done with generosity, and it's done with kindness, and it's done from a place of love. And I think that is what matters. And it's done from the idea of what we want to do is to give people Liverpool. So when you ask me about what's been hard, in a sense, to be honest with you, Patrick, there's not been as much Liverpool to give as we'd like. You know, the city, like all the city's dormant, and it breaks your heart. To be honest, I was in town earlier today, and normally on a Saturday afternoon in the city centre, it's absolutely rammed. And everyone's, sorting themselves out one way or the other. People are planning nights out, or they're just having lovely afternoons. The shops are heaving. There's the biennials on around this time under normal sort of 2-yearly circumstances. The biennials on now. There's gigs, there's theatre. There's what makes up a city and what makes up life. And we really want to offer that to people from the point of view of the city of Liverpool within our football-based content. We want to give people, I love the idea that someone who comes from the US once, maybe twice a season max to get a Liverpool game can have a great time in Liverpool. That's really important to me, but can then go away and listen to the Anfield rap stuff and just be transported back. So they know what the pubs are like around Anfield. They know what the city's like. They know the human geography of everything. They know the way people speak to one another, and they feel all of that. And then we give them that back. And we say, you can have that whenever you want if you come with us. And that's important to us, but it's obviously been really, really, really hard to do that bit because there's that bit doesn't exist in the same way it doesn't exist for anybody. So we've got some really good interviews. There was a great one John did with Dave Jones that I always remember. That is the sort of thing that we wouldn't have done. David Jones, the Sky Sports presenter, that we wouldn't have done if the whole pandemic hadn't have happened. There was a lot of people who just had some time on their hands, sat in their houses, and we could speak to them. And I'd like to find ways to keep aspects of that going. I think the idea of being able to interview someone in the house at 10 p.m. when they're relaxed and they've had a nice evening and they've got a beer, I think that's a good thing. I've enjoyed doing things like this, which again we probably wouldn't have done under normal circumstances, and we can keep doing things like this. If people like them. So there is things to take, but ultimately, we're not the sort of football podcast that just wants to either wallow in nostalgia or rant and rave about refereeing decisions. The people who contribute to the Anfield Rap, many of whom have either were or have become really, really good friends, are people who want to live life. And what's been difficult is the ability to live life to the full has been removed from us. So that's who we are, and that's what we want to put over, is the idea that firstly that football's brilliant and that the city of Liverpool's brilliant and that those things can be at the centre of your life, but they're not the only thing that we all have to live for. We've got so much more than that, and that's something that we've missed.
Yeah, I mean, like my I got to visit Liverpool just a little bit before the pandemic had started. Me and my family went over, and the way that it was kind of is like it's a podcast about Liverpool through the lens of football, but there's just so much more. I can remember like 2016 when I'd never been to Liverpool, but like listening to the writer and about what kind of like shows and concerts were going to happen, or just the Weekender, talking about people coming on about plays and stuff. And I thought that it was much more than football, but it was just so Liverpool. The way that you talk about Ollie McBurney being committed to the idea of being Ollie McBurney, I feel like the show is committed to the idea about being Liverpool.
I think it's really kind of you to say that, and that is massively what we are going for. We want to put all of that in, and that matters. And I think also within that, I think that if you look at the work that Boss have done with Jamie, but not just with Jamie, in a wider sense, I think they've committed to that in a worldwide and local context. I think that the club, before when we were talking about sort of Fenway Sports Group, I'm probably the first to complain about some of Peter Moore's cringier interviews and more cliched moments and Shankly drawings or pictures on his wall and all of that. But what I think he got absolutely right was he committed Liverpool both on the pitch, off the pitch, institutionally, to the notion of this means more. And he committed to that in a city-ish way, and that was, I think, a huge benefit for the club. And I think the club now tries to understand the city and tries to work with the city and understands that the people, the events we've done with the club, Boston House of Blues was with the club, and no one told us what we couldn't say. No one, there wasn't, you can't do this. No one said you can't swear, because if they had, I'd have broken that rule within the first 20 seconds. No one said this is an LFC corporate event, you can't do this list of things when you're on stage. They trusted us completely. And I think that's worthy of, that's worthy of massive credit to them. And that summer we did, probably cumulatively by the time that summer had ended, we did 6 events, I think, with Liverpool Football Club. And as I say, at no point did anybody say, you can't do this, you can't say this, don't do this. That wasn't what happened. They trusted us because they trusted our love for team and city is completely genuine. And I think that would not have happened 4 or 5 years ago. And I think that as a football club, the manager, more than any other figure, the manager makes the weather. And I think as a football club like Liverpool, that's, you can double that. What Jurgen Klopp is and what Jurgen Klopp does is hugely important. But I think what that then needs is for people to completely embrace that and come with it. And I would credit not just Peter Moore, because I think there's always been a lot of good people who work at Liverpool. But what I think Peter managed to do in his time there was put the people who had that sort of rich love of the city, was give them the room for that to blossom and support being quite brave, front and centre. What they do with Jamie Webster, it's easy now because it looks like it's a massive win. It's become a massive win. So it's easy now. It's not dissimilar to talking about the 1920 season. It's easy now to say, oh, well, it was always going to work. There's no truth to that at all. It's practically unique. What they've got Webster doing, what they've had Webster do is practically unique. And Jamie deserves a lot of credit for that. And he takes it very seriously and he's committed to it wholeheartedly. He's a remarkably impressive person, Jamie. He's likable. But on top of that, he's genuinely thoughtful about his craft and what he does. But that was never inevitable, that all of that was going to work, but it worked because Liverpool Football Club, the corporate institution, committed to it, and they do deserve credit for that. And it's easy for us to go, well, it's because all the Scouse lads are sound, Jamie's sound, Akko's sound, Gibbo's sound, it was always going to work. It's not true. They had to support us and they had to give us room, and they did. And as I say, there's a period under Liverpool ownerships or things where people would have been scared of it. There's a period now where other sports teams would be scared of it. For a variety of reasons. You've got to be able to trust the people and know what they're about for certain. But they did it, and they deserve credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool's nothing without Scousers, and I kind of want to allow some of our members, because I mean, our supporters clubs would be nothing without our members. We love to have all of them. We want to have them contribute to this as well. So I just want to take a transition. We're getting kind of later. It's been about an hour, so I want to kind of allow some questions that they have submitted to kind of get some airtime. Also, if you haven't, for anyone that is still watching, if you do want to submit a question, submit it now, and then after this question, then we can then maybe transition to some other ones. But one of the ones, this is from Matthew Hughes, who mentions, with Trent's recent omission from the England squad and Henderson's season-ending injury, what do you think about those two missing the Euros and kind of having the summer off, and how do you think that kind of plays into, does that help our chances? Or do you think, maybe, I don't know, just something else?
And the footballers will always want to play the football matches, and they'll always want to represent the country because it's good for them. There's literally a financial argument, but I don't think it's about that really. They want to play in the best tournaments. So I want the footballers to be happy. Alexander-Arnold and Henderson have done an awful lot for us. So if what would make them happy will be representing their country, then fine. I think whilst they're at different ends of the career, I think with the 2022 World Cup only being another 18 months away, I think both of them have got one more big tournament in them anyway at this point. When I say both of them, I mean Henderson has. And then from Arnold's point of view, he's got his whole career in front of him. From Arnold's point of view, though, I think he's going to have a little bit of an issue here in the short term where he's a difficult tactical fit for his England manager. And I think that's something which I'm not saying he needs to work on. And in fact, that'd concern me. I think Arnold's quietly had a slightly better season than is sort of popularly thought. And I actually think aspects of his defending, I think he's put some bad performances in, but I think aspects of his defending, especially his work on the cover, and his awareness of what's around him has come on leaps and bounds. I think at times he's been caught out a little bit one-on-one, but I think he's actually defended pretty well. But again, he's also had constant chaos to the left of him all the way through the season. And these aren't excuses. These are mitigating circumstances. He's had no consistency in the centre-half who plays directly to his right. But what he's also missed, and it's more Gomez than Van Dijk, Gomez is brilliant at passing the ball to Trent Arnold. He's brilliant at it. He gets it to him where he wants it, into his stride. He takes players out the game and he gets him further up the pitch. Because Gomez's starting position can be so high, but also that arc that he has on his pass from that right-hand side, it's just into his stride. It's beautiful, to be quite honest with you. And he can take 3 or 4 players out the game, and it means that Trent can have confidence and be battling forward to get on the end of the ball. You can't have that confidence with all due respect to Nat Phillips. I'd argue we can't have that confidence with Fabinho playing there, to be honest with you, because Gomez is that good at that. So I think that's been really, really difficult for him. So I think Trent's had a good season. But I think he's simultaneously, there's aspects of this that he's going to have to be aware of, that one of the problems with being a genuinely unique footballer is that your club manager will work out how to use you better than your international manager, who could just do with some cogs that fit the plan.
Yeah, I mean, you actually, in that process, you also answered a question from Linda Mittman, who basically wanted your assessment of Trent. So kind of a nice 2-in-1 there. From some of our committee members, from Nick, when you go to Anfield, do you have a match day routine? If so, like what does it look like?
I mean, it's funny because a little bit of it times is work, or what me and John sort of laugh about and call ticket chaos, where you're trying to meet people to facilitate the picking up and dropping off of tickets. And trust me, John has to do a lot more of that than I do. But it can have a knock-on effect. For me, listen, my ideal day actually is to be pretty city centre and then go to Anfield quite late. To be honest with you, if Liverpool are at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, I'll want to meet people in town at 12, either eat with them or not. If we've already had a good bit of breakfast or something like that, then you're just on the march. Big 2.5 hours. Taxi as late as humanly possible. Get in the ground. Basically, be coming up the steps as you'll never walk alone. Has either begun or is just about to begin. Watch the game and then do our post-match work, which is always a pleasure to do. So if we're at Anfield, it's then go to Glenbook, do the pink. If I'm doing the pink, it's go to Tia to do the video. If I'm doing the video, and then sit there and try and write 800 words immediately after that about the football match, and then it's either hang around Anfield for another half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, or back into town. To be honest with you, and then it's out in town for as long as humanly possible. I like the escape valve of a non-footy pint. So, nothing will make me happier than to know that there's, a gang of people who haven't necessarily engaged with the match, who are out and about. Not because, I get sick of all of that sort of stuff, but it's just nice to know that it's there as a possibility, because you end up with lots of different groups of your friends all being out in the city at once. So it's where you're going to go. Well, if you're just going to go somewhere and say to people, come to me, but it's quite nice to be able to think, well, there is somewhere to go where we can escape just talking about football relatively quickly. Although that stuff talks itself out quite fast as well. And then the idea of being in town for as long as humanly possible. For me, I'm very committed to to nightclubs ahead of after school clubs, as I've been saying on shows. So the idea that there's the late bars out and all of that, that's a great day. 12 till 3, 12 noon to 3 a.m. sounds practically perfect as far as I'm concerned. And then just embracing all of that, having a fantastic time, going all the way, ideally having a dance, and hopefully Liverpool have won.
Yeah, I mean,
Miss dancing.
yeah. So dancing adjacent, from Adam's and we always love music suggestions. Do you have any playlists that you love? Any music that's been getting through? Any new albums? Like,
Oh God, yeah, loads really. There's a really good new Blessing Madonna track, actually about dancing, that she's done in conjunction with someone. Let me get where's my phone? What have I been listening to on Spotify an awful lot recently? I am very. I've been listening to more and more actually. There's a lot of, as John would say, a lot more techno than you might expect, as ever. A lot of sort of Korean stuff. There's a woman called Shia knocking round. There's been a really good song recently that's come on called Life is Perfecto, by an organization called CFCF. I really enjoyed the new Nick Cave album. I'm very into trap. Loved P Valley and its soundtrack and everything that sounds like it. I'm absolutely all over. I adored, in a way that I haven't adored for years, the new it's now 12 months old. The Fiona Apple album is, for me, the last Fiona Apple album. I don't like Fiona Apple prior to this point particularly. For me, it's the best record of the last 10 years. I thought it was incredible. There's really good new floor plan stuff that I'd recommend anybody listening to. You Sue is, as I've just pressed play on it by accident, that's the Korean stuff. Cassandra Jenkins' new record's excellent within there. That's really, really good. Oh, what are they called? The Weather Station. Their album is terrific, genuinely terrific. Let me find out what it's called. I listened to all of those as they came through. So their album was called Ignorance. Terrific, really, really good. Phoebe Bridgers. So is that enough? There's lots there.
yeah, that's plenty.
It was genuinely, like, one of the worst bits of the lockdown was when Sophie, the sort of pop / sort of new wave pop, hyper pop artist, passed away. When we did the rider, I used to pick stuff that was PC music / hyper pop, and much to at times appalling John and Adam, I think, in particular. And Adam once said to me, "I don't even know how you dance to it," and it was, when Sophie had the accident and Sophie passed away, it was really, really heartbreaking, to be honest with you. Most celebrity deaths I'm sort of not that bothered by, and there's loads of reasons why, but mostly it's a slightly, perhaps at times, arrogant point of view, but that the best work, I'm never going to meet these people, and the best work is behind them. That is the case most of the time, but for Sophie it really wasn't, and I literally do believe that pop music in all its different forms will be genuinely poorer for the next sort of 5 years than it wouldn't have been if Sophie was around producing, remixing, and just sort of setting a certain standard and blazing a trail. So that one hit me hard, and I would recommend all of Sophie's work. But I'd sort of start with where I started, which is BIP from about 2014, which was one of the early singles, which in a proper universe is #1 in every country on the planet for 12 weeks.
Yeah, that's powerful. We'll finish it off with one final question. Not sure if it was yesterday or recent, but on the daily rundown, you wrote about like the women's side. Are you hopeful for a TV deal, and what are your thoughts on the women's game? Are there any plans to maybe like focus on that a bit more, or maybe
For
even
us,
just like
for Tor, or for the
for
football?
for Ta?
For Tor, yeah, we're going tomorrow, and we're going to do a post-match show immediately afterwards. And we've been making an effort throughout the course of the year to cover women's football far greater than we had done to this point. There's lots of reasons why it was difficult, to be quite honest with you. But they are excuses, proper excuses, not just Virgil van Dijk's injured excuses. These are excuses. We weren't good enough there for a period of time, and we had to have a think about that. At the same time, Liverpool weren't good enough for a period of time, and I think that obviously, informs why you're not good enough. If Liverpool were making Champions League quarterfinals in the women's side, then it would be easier for us to have galvanised ourselves. But again, that's another excuse. So, if your starting position is that it's not been good enough, then you've got to maintain that out of decency and out of honest reflection. So yes, we will be doing more. We're not desperate to do stuff like player interviews. And one of the reasons why is because, firstly, the idea of me at the age of 40 interviewing someone like Bo Kearns at the age of 19, I just feel like a dad, to be quite honest with you, and that wouldn't be much fun. But also what we want to do is what we do. So, the Anfield Rap isn't formed around player interviews or stuff like that. The Anfield Rap's formed around the idea of telling the story of supporting Liverpool from the heart of the city. And I think that's ultimately what we want to be doing, is going to football matches and talking about them in our voices. We would, being excited by them and enjoying them absolutely massively. And so we are that's what we want to do. Like, there's Amy and Lauren do great work on Redmen stuff around the women's team, and they do a great job of interviewing these women, and they're excellent at it, and they understand it ever so well. We want to be swept up and being supporters of this team. That's been a difficult thing to get swept up in this season. They really could have done with coming back up. You talk about TV deals there; they're going to miss out on a fair bit of that now. I watched Chelsea versus Wolfsburg on Wednesday. It was a really good game, but it was a bit sad because if everything goes absolutely perfectly for the Liverpool women from this point, it's 3 years before they're playing in the Champions League. That's if everything goes absolutely perfectly. That doesn't allow for the competition. It doesn't allow for everybody else improving as well. For Liverpool to play in a game of that stature, you're looking at 7, conceivably. And that, again, means everyone's done the job pretty well. If Liverpool played in that game in 7 years' time, they've actually come from where they are now in the division below the top flight. They've done brilliantly. So it's difficult because that's what you want. Imagine Liverpool have played a Champions League quarter-final this week. Imagine how berserk we would have gone at the Anfield Wrap. Imagine how much we'd have been behind it, and imagine how much pleasure it would give people. Before you even do all the stuff around representation, which matters, before you do all the stuff around the idea that there's a really strong core of American women, not just women, but American women who love women's football, who've grown up playing the game, who've just had a summer or 12 months of watching their favourite players go to other Premier League teams, they feel alienated by that. They find that difficult. And I think that that's significant, to be quite honest with you. So now we're in a situation where there's possibility of much more exposure for the women's game, and much more. The money doesn't really matter in the first place. It's that idea of visibility. But you're not telling me that Nike don't want visibility with their logo on a Liverpool shirt. They want Liverpool playing in that top division of English football as women. That's what they want, because they want it on that shirt. And I think that can help drive this forward now as well. And listen, we've got to grow in it together. You know, Liverpool are playing tomorrow night. I think it's available to watch on LFC TV. Our friend Emma Sanders is doing co-commentary, so I think you can watch it through YouTube. So tomorrow it's, I think, a 6:30 kickoff. We've had time zone confusion today, Patrick, so I think that's a 2:30 kickoff for all of you. If you can, try and watch it. There's some good players there. I'd expect them to win tomorrow. There are some good players there. Kerry Holland looks a good sign, and Rachel Furness is incredible. She started this season brilliantly. She's just a remarkably impressive footballer, an absolute powerhouse, and reads the game brilliantly. Mel Lawley feels as though she's got her act together a little bit. I've been quite stinging and Mel and felt a bit bad about it, but, you know, she's a very good direct carrier of the ball. Niamh Farhi is, you know, she's a very, very good player. She'll be playing captain in the sides. You know, there's quality in there. There's just tying it all together, winning some games, building some momentum, getting promoted. It's what they need to do next. And if they do that, or when they do that, we'll be there, the Anfield Wrap, every step of the way with them. But that's not to say that, you know, that Lauren and Amy at Redmen won't be there as well, doing the really good work that they've been doing. Kiva O'Neill's trying to do more of it in the Athletic, and, you know, Kiva's a talented writer. She's a very good person as well. Emma Sanders, who I mentioned, will be writing about it for the BBC. This community, it's a little nascent, but it exists, and these are good people doing good work, and they're all worthy of following and paying attention to, and hopefully it all comes together. And as I say, we'll do a call in 3 years, and they'll be playing Champions League football. And if it takes 5, it takes 5. And it takes 7, it takes 7. But just imagine a woman from Liverpool lifting the European Cup.
Fantastic. What you have done, actually, with inadvertently, I'm assuming, is allow us to transition towards kind of the closing. But as we promote our next one, we have Lauren and Amy from coming as our next guests, April 11th. So anybody that is still currently here, be sure to tune into that. So thank you, Neil, for that wonderful segue opportunity. We want to just thank everyone for attending today. Thank you so much, Neil. It's been an absolute blast. We do love doing these. They're free for our members every couple of weeks. Do you have any closing regards, any closing statements that you want to make?
Just a quick in the questions. Matt Hughes says, what position do I think we most need to strengthen in the summer? It depends where we finish in the league, whether or not we've got European or Champions League football. But ultimately, I'd just quite like us to go and buy Haaland or Mbappe, but I think Haaland feels a little bit more likely, and then we'll go from there. What else? Do I think that FSG with partners, more investment and partners, more outlays in the future? My answer to that is no. In that, I think that partnership work will be more about them working with other clubs. I, for instance, expect them to get a women's team in the United States at some point pretty soon, because there's a really nice clean pipeline there that they can do between the US and Liverpool, and leverage that. As I say, I still think that there is a chance that there is greater investment for other reasons, and it may end up all being tied in. But I think that investment that's happened there from Redbird's very much around rights and different bits of organisations. But I could be wrong. What do I know? I'm just some fella who's read some articles and is guessing. And there are no other questions now, so there we go.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone,
Thank you all
today. We really do appreciate that, and hope we see you again soon. Thank you. Oh, also, before we are actually still raising money for Michael Liverpool. I do want to make sure the link for your donation is in the chat. You might have to scroll up a bit, or if someone could repost that would be fantastic. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Please, if you are able to, we would love for you to donate. If you are unable to, that is perfectly fine. It's still, obviously, it is free for members. So, but thank you once again, everyone, and have a great afternoon, evening.